ready? As soon as Mark sits down, we'll hammer. Wait for Mark.
Thank you.
Stand up again.
Good, Mark?
Absolutely,
All
thank
right,
you.
let's get the meeting to order. We'll start with the pledge.
All right.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome everybody to the general meeting of the Southampton Town Trustees. Welcome to the folks on Zoom. October 7th here at Town Hall. I ask the Secretary and Treasurer to start with the vote.
All right. Scott Harwitz,
Present.
Warner present. Chip Marin,
Here.
Joe McLaughlin, present. Matt Parsons. We're all here, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. All right, so just for information, we are having a special meeting coming up Tuesday, October 15th for the purposes of discussing our budget. It will be 1 p.m. here at Town Hall. And then we will be on our regular schedule with our work session at 9:30 a.m. on the 21st of October, followed by our general session at 1 p.m. We have some communications which we will dispense with reading so we can get into the discussion.
Second that.
Seconded by Trustee Warner. All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to have a presentation by Mike Dole from the SOAR program.
Mike?
Now you can come on up, Mike.
All right. Just stand by the podium.
Are you gonna do,
Slides, yes.
yep.
Oh, you can stand by the podium, sure.
So, hi everybody, my name is Mike Dole. Some of you know me from the new trustees. I'm the Associate Director of Shellfish Restoration and Aquaculture at Stony Brook University. I work with the lab of Dr. Chris Gobler. And I'm here today to ask your permission to expand on some oyster restoration work we've been doing in Shinnecock Bay as part of the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. And partners in this particular project, we're partnering with a program that's called the SOAR program, which stands for Supporting Oyster Aquaculture and Restoration. That's a national program that's run by Pew Charitable Trust and the Nature Conservancy. And I think some representatives from those organizations might be zooming in currently. But before I get into this project, I thought it would be helpful just to give a quick little background about the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. Scott and Ed, I know you know the program very well, so this is kind of just an update for you, but for the newer trustees, kind of just an introduction of what we've been doing for the past, going on a little over 12 years now with the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. So, I'm here for your benefit, so stop me and ask questions if you want, or if you want me to speed up, just give me a signal to make it quick. But it should be pretty brief, just a brief background. Where should I point this to advance? This first, it should. You just click the button at the top right. There we go. Okay, so the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program was started in 2012 to try to reverse some deteriorating environmental conditions that was happening in Shinnecock Bay for at least 50 years prior. Just to highlight some of these two important aspects of these deteriorating conditions. One, the hard clam population. So that top plot is just showing annual hard clam landings since 1970. Okay, this is from basically the Southampton town waters on the South Shore. So it includes Shinnecock Bay as well as Eastern Mauritius Bay and Quantuck. But you can see hard clam landings have declined precipitously over those 50 years. So in 2012, hard clam landings were less than 99% of the peak that happened in 1970. We've also been experiencing the recurrence and intensification of harmful algal blooms, particularly brown tides, which first appeared in 1985 and pretty much had occurred every year since. So in response to these deteriorating conditions, the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program was started by some researchers at Stony Brook University, including my boss, Dr. Chris Gobler. And the core strategy of the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program is to increase the biotic filtration in the bay, meaning filtration by shellfish, clams, and oysters. We hope that this increased filtration will then help improve, limit the brown tide blooms and help improve water quality. The primary focus has been on hard clams for the last 12 years. Okay, hard clams are at, even though they're at much reduced levels, they still are prevalent in Shinnecock Bay. There's still a hard clam fishery in Shinnecock Bay. So we focused most of our efforts over the last 12 years on hard clams, but we've also done a lot of experimental work over the last several years with oysters, which I'll get into. And just one thing to keep in mind, with both hard clam and oysters populations in Shinnecock Bay when we started in 2012, they're known as what we call recruitment limited, okay? Which basically means they're just not producing enough babies, okay? There's not enough recruitment of new individuals coming in. And in order to address that, we need to enhance the spawning stock in the bay. So that's known as stock enhancement, to enhance the spawning stock. So I'll just give you a quick background of what we've done with hard clams over the last 12 years in terms of stock enhancement. So the primary strategy was to establish spawner sanctuaries, okay? These are harvest-free areas where hard clams are planted in high densities to help increase fertilization and help increase the production of larvae. Okay, so we've worked with the trustees over the last 12 years to establish these spawner sanctuaries. Since 2012, we've established 6 spawner sanctuary areas. They're shown on the map here. As you'll notice, they're all in western Shinnecock Bay. And within each of these areas, we plant the clams at high densities on half-acre plots. So we don't just spread them out evenly over the area. We concentrate them on half-acre plots. This increases the density to help increase fertilization, because when they spawn, they're separate males and females. They spawn into the water, and fertilization happens in the water. So we try to get them as close together as possible. And then we selected western Shinnecock Bay because we did a lot of hydrodynamic modeling. And it showed, the hydrodynamic models show, and there's an example of the model on that bottom figure there. But the hydrodynamic models show that if we when clams spawn in western Shinnecock Bay, the larvae are going to be retained within the bay. Okay? The first 2 weeks, larvae are part of the plankton, and they drift around with the currents. So when we plant clams in western Shinnecock Bay, larvae are retained in the eastern bay. And that's what that bottom plot is showing. You see all those light blue dots in eastern Shinnecock Bay. That's where the larvae wind up at the end of 2 weeks when they're ready to settle and to turn into little clams. And from 2012 to 2021, we planted nearly 5 million adult clams into these sanctuary areas at an average cost of over 30 cents a clam. So this was a significant effort, which obviously was an expensive effort, and a lot of money has gone into putting clams into these sanctuaries. So has it worked? The answer is yes, and the results have been quite extraordinary. And I know a lot of you are familiar with it, but if not, I'm just going to run you through some of the results we've seen. First of all, we've seen an over 50-fold increase. These are based on our surveys. We do benthic surveys every year throughout Shinnecock Bay at the same sites, 66 sites we do annually throughout Shinnecock Bay. And there's been a 50-fold increase in clam densities in eastern Shinnecock Bay since 2015. That's showing up on the top figure. And this increase is mostly due to small clams. So the bars in that top figure are color-coded for clam size, and that orange is new recruits. So there's been a lot of increased recruitment into eastern Shinnecock Bay. Densities are up over 50-fold since 2015. And that's exactly where the hydrodynamic models said the larvae would go. So that really matches up nicely with the models that said that the larvae would be retained in eastern Shinnecock Bay. We've seen a small increase in western Shinnecock Bay, not as much, and there's reasons for that I won't get into here. But as you can see, we've had a tremendous increase in clam recruitment in eastern Shinnecock Bay. And this increase in clam densities has been tracked by the fishery. So this is now showing, this top graph is showing landings data from eastern and western Shinnecock Bay since 2008. Okay, and the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program was started in 2012. You can see after the start of creating these spawner sanctuaries, a real beautiful increase in hard clam landings. From 2012 all the way up, there was a peak in 2011. This is a 1,500% increase in landings in Shinnecock Bay since the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program started. And to put that in a little bit more historical perspective, this is the plot I showed earlier, but now it's extended through 2023. And hard clam landings in 2021 was the highest it's been in over 40 years. So you have to go back before the brown tide into the early 1980s to find landings as high as they are now. So it's really been quite impressive. I just also want to point out I have a lot more data I could show, which I'm not. This is not happening anyplace else on Long Island. This is not happening in any of the other South Shore bays. This is only happening in Shinnecock Bay. And with all those increased clams and all that increased filtration that's happening in the water, we've also seen incredible improvements in water quality, which was the goal of the project. And I just want to point out there hasn't been a brown tide in 6 years. You know, knock on wood. This is wood, right? Okay, knock on wood. There hasn't been a brown tide in 6 years. This is the longest span without a brown tide since 1985, which you can see up in that figure there. There's been a lot of other incredible ecological effects that have happened in the bay since this program started, including the expanse of seagrass. So we've seen improvements in water clarity. We've seen well over 100 acres of new eelgrass taking hold. I'm not going to get into all, but we published a couple of years ago, we published this paper, and I'm happy to, I'm sure you have it already, but I'm happy to send it out to whoever doesn't have it, where we get into the details of everything with the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. So if you want to learn more, I'm happy to send you that paper. So now, you know, we're turning our sights on oysters and trying to use some of the same strategies we did with clams to help restore oyster populations in Shinnecock Bay. And I just want to give you, and yes, that picture is from Shinnecock Bay. This is one of the reefs we've restored in Shinnecock Bay, and I'll show you a little more of this. But I just want to give you a background. Everything we've done so far with oysters has been very small scale, very experimental. And I just want to show you just some of that data, which kind of builds into what the logic for what we're proposing to do now. So unlike hard clams where we planted adult clams, those are all adult clams that we planted in the sanctuary. And the reason we planted adult clams is because when you plant clam seed, you're just feeding the crabs. Okay, we've planted millions of clam seed, and for the most part, we can't find a single one after a year. They really are just clam food. But by putting in adult clams that are spawning and then making way more larvae and way more babies than we could ever plant, you know, nature finds a way, and that strategy has worked. With oysters, we are able to plant juvenile oysters, and we plant something that's called spat-on shell. So at the Southampton Marine Station, we cure shell. Sometimes it's surf clam shell, we get oyster shell, whatever shell we can get. Shell is a limited resource, but we cure it outside for over a year. We clean it with power washers. We bag it into mesh bags, which you can see in figure C. It's about 5 gallons of shell per bag. They're about yay big, okay? About the size of a cinder block. We then put them in setting tanks. We add oyster larvae to the setting tanks right when they're ready to set, and the oyster larvae set on the shell. You can see that in panel E. All those little dots on the shell, those are little oyster spat that have set on the shell. And then we take these bags, we bring them out into Shinnecock Bay, and they function like cinder blocks. We can build three-dimensional structures. We build reefs with these shell bags, and then you can see in figure F what it looks like after a couple of years. So the oysters really, when we put them in, they do tremendous in Shinnecock Bay, especially over the first couple of years. We get fabulous growth. After about 4 years, the oysters are up to 8 inches big, which you can see in that bottom picture. I'm holding 2 of those. Those are about 4 or 5-year-old oysters that I'm holding in that bottom picture. Just unbelievable. When they grow in nature, oysters grow vertically upwards. So you can see that in the picture of the reef. That's taken at low tide, so the reef is exposed, so you can see it. But they grow vertically upwards, help increasing the elevation of the bottom, which is really important, so they don't get buried in the sediments. And we've just had this incredible growth. And that picture was taken 2.5 years after the shell bags were put out. Now, each year, some oysters die, just like in any population of anything. There's some oysters die. And after about 4 to 5 years, okay, survivorship is less than 10% of what we put out there. So really the lifespan of an oyster in Shinnecock Bay and pretty much across Long Island right now is about 4 to 5 years. And what's limiting that is an oyster disease called derma, which is prevalent everywhere. It's ubiquitous. The only place you don't find it is in low salinity areas, like Mecox Bay. One reason why oysters really thrive well in Mecox Bay is those low salinities, so you have less of this derma. But pretty much every place it's salty. Dermo is a problem, and it limits the lifespan of oysters to about 4 to 5 years. So you can see that's a picture of that same reef. You see the picture at 2.5 years, then you can see it again a couple years later when it's 5 years old. The reef is mostly collapsed, okay, because the oysters die every year. Most of the oysters die. The shell starts to crumble. The oysters fall over. There hasn't been any recruitment to the reef, okay? So in order for a reef to be sustaining, you would want oysters to recruit to the reef every year to continue to build it up. So new individuals can replace the ones that perish. We've had no recruitment to the reef, okay? You know, which really is just saying we need to build more spawning stock in the bay, and we need to be able to connect populations. The larvae that were spawned from this reef, they go into the water column as plankton, just like hard clams, and the currents transport them away, so they don't settle back on the same reef. They get transported away. So in order to build what we call a metapopulation, or a series of connected subpopulations throughout the bay, we need to put oysters in different areas to connect the populations. So the larvae from one area that's produced in one area will then settle on another reef, and so forth. So it's called population connectivity. They're trying to connect these populations of oysters. And that brings me to the project that we're proposing now. In 2000, during COVID, so during 2021, the Nature Conservancy and Pew Charitable Trust started a national program called Supporting Oyster Aquaculture and Restoration, or the SOAR program. The purpose of this program was to purchase oysters from oyster farmers who were struggling during COVID. Okay, they could not sell, restaurants were closed, they had no outlet to sell their product. Oysters were getting this big, and nobody wants to, you know, eat an oyster on a half shell this big. So what this program did was purchase those oysters from farmers at a fair market price, you know, so I think it was like 60 cents at least an oyster or more. And then they transferred those oysters to nearby restoration programs. And they did this in states up and down the East Coast and on the West Coast. Here in New York, the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program was one of those recipients for that first round of the SOAR program. Those are some pictures of us planting the oysters. And we planted them in western Shinnecock Bay, piggybacking off of areas where we already had some restoration going, okay? So where we were doing our experimental reefs, and we planted the oysters there. We planted about 180,000 adult oysters during that year from the SOAR program. The program was such a success that the Nature Conservancy and Pew Charitable Trust received funding to continue the program. So COVID's over. Oyster farms are doing fine, but this program is such a success that they're continuing it. They got funding to buy more oysters from farms and relocate them to restoration programs. And again, in New York, they want to partner with the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program to plant these oysters. So in our new project, we're proposing to plant these oysters on an area off of Pine Neck in Weesuck Creek. We want to plant these oysters in combination with spat-on shell that will produce at the Southampton Marine Station to build a reef structure along the shoreline of Pine Neck there in Weesuck Creek. This is just a little more detail on the area. It's about 200 meters by 10 meters, so we're taking a nice long, basically a long rectangle that runs parallel to the shore. Part of the purpose of this too is to look at shoreline protection, so we'll be doing that as part of the monitoring we do. We've already done some preliminary shoreline surveys, and we'll be following that over time to see if there's any shoreline protection. Well, there is marsh. You can see in the bottom picture where it's zoomed in, you can see that beach there. That's all marsh that's been eroding. So we'll see if there's any, if it helps with shoreline protection and it helps some of that marsh to grow back. That would be one aspect of it. Again, it's in western Shinnecock Bay, the same areas that we put the clams. The purpose is to maximize larval retention there. And we've already scoped out the area. It's got a really nice firm bottom, so it's really suitable bottom for oysters. And then just a couple other things I'll point out. The area is already located within the already established hard clam spawner sanctuary. So there's no asking to close other waters to shellfish, and this is already a sanctuary area, so we're just putting it in an existing sanctuary area. And I'll just also point out that since it's located off the Pine Neck Preserve, there is no residential area right there. There's no homeowners, so there won't be any conflict, because sometimes that could be a conflict when you're doing work right in somebody's backyard. So this is just a nature preserve. There's no homeowners there on the shoreline. Very briefly, the plan is, one, we're going to put down a base of shell. We're getting a good amount of shell, 30 to 40 yards of shell that's already been cured. It's being trucked down from New Hampshire. It's been cured for 2 years and dried. We're going to use that to make a base, okay, and that will help prevent oysters from being buried in the sediments that are planted. It will also provide substrate for new recruitment. So if larvae do set there, there's going to be a lot of stuff for the larvae to set on. We'll also put out bags of spout-on shell, and not a lot, but about 200 bags of spout-on shell that we'll use to build small walls, basically, to help prevent the oysters from getting washed up to shore during storms. It's kind of all mapped out in that little diagram there. And then the oysters, and the final step would be taking these oysters purchased by the SOAR program and planting them across the area. Just one other thing I'd like to point out is we've been doing for the last couple of years now recruitment surveys all throughout Shinnecock Bay. So we're trying to find where are there oysters, where is there recruitment in Shinnecock Bay. To do that, we put out flat squares of shell. You can see them in the pictures. We put them out all around the bay. We swap them out every 3 weeks, and then we look for oyster settlement on these bags. And we swap out every 3 weeks so we can figure out the timing of recruitment too, when it's happening. You can see in the top picture on the right, there's some oyster looking through the mesh. You can see baby oyster spat, that's natural recruitment on the shell. One thing that was really exciting and cool, this was the best recruitment year in Shinnecock for oysters that I've ever seen in Shinnecock Bay. Doing the oyster studies across Long Island, and I have to say this is a regional thing. This has been an incredible oyster recruitment year everywhere. But in Shinnecock Bay, we've already found the highest recruitment by the canal, by the Shinnecock Canal, which is quite interesting because the locks, only open up to let water flow from the Peconic Estuary there. So we think the larvae might be coming from oyster farms in the Peconic Estuary. Because water's not flowing anywhere, but there's really good amount of recruitment right around the canal. Like if you go to Cowfish and you look on the rocks on the shore there's just a beautiful oyster set all over there. Our recruitment bags in that area, on each one of those squares, which are about, they're a 1/4 meter squared, so it's a 1/2 meter by a 1/2 meter, we were getting 100 recruits per one of those flat bags, which the most we ever got before that was less than 10. 2, 3, 4. We're getting 100 recruits per bag. That equates to 400 per meter squared. So this is really exciting. This is something to build off of, and something I will most likely be coming back to talk to you about in the future is expanding restoration into this area, not necessarily to put oysters, but just to put substrate. Try to get shell down and some innovative ways along shorelines just to put substrate down for oysters to set, and then let nature, let nature do what nature does there. So that's that, and I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's a great presentation, great conversation. A couple things that come to mind right out of the gate is the Cowfish project. I guess that clearly shows it was a jurisdiction over there. And the other thing is that similar to the area that he's talking about now off Pine Neck, when we were going to work on aquaculture.
Yeah, that's
as well.
I do need the coordinates of the proposed oysters where you're going to put them down, because we're working with Cash and they're doing a survey in that area for I believe it's 12 proposed 1-acre agriculture plots that we were going to put out, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't have any conflicts with the clams, oysters, or any other of the shellfish that was put there. So they're in the process of doing the survey. So I need those coordinates so I can overlay it over our proposed aquaculture site.
That's great, and I believe I sent them already via email. You're on the email. I just sent it last week, so there's quick description of what I just described now for the project with the corner coordinates of that long rectangle. And in our previous meeting, we looked at the proposed areas for the aquaculture plots in relation to this, and there is no overlap. They're close, but
There's one in Stones Creek and Phillips's Creek where they did do a survey and they found some giant oysters. So there's one of those sites we're gonna have to give up. But
Gotcha.
all the other ones, there was no conflicts.
Great.
So, which is good.
Familiar with the area I live
What's
right.
the approximate salinity up there where we are proposing to put that shell?
I mean, the salinity is pretty constant throughout Shinnecock Bay, so we're looking in like the upper 20s or so. So there really isn't that I know of any low salinity areas in Shinnecock Bay. And if I'm wrong, please tell me, because I don't really know of any low salinity areas in the bay.
No, they're all pretty much
Yeah,
mixed.
it's pretty much the same everything else.
Well mixed.
So that chart that you had before that showed we had a peak around 21, I guess, relative to the shellfish landings.
Yep, the
And
hard
you
clams.
The hard clams, yeah, the hard clams. So you see it coming off of that now, and heading in the other direction. I mean, understanding not everything goes straight up. You have these variations of ups and downs. But are you looking at that? Are you thinking that there's any cause for concern or balance issues there?
So I think, and you're right. I mean, it was nice to see it go. It was like 5 or 6 years in a row. It just kept going up and up and up. And then the last 2 years, it's come down a little bit. What I think is, yes, it's level. We're leveling off around an area, around the harvest level. Okay, there was so many clams planted in the Western Bay. They're producing so many larvae, and I think we're kind of flattening out right now. And there'll be interannual variability, so there'll be differences from year to year. So I think we'll see that bounce around a certain line. I think right now there's a couple points. There's no need for concern, I don't think. I think longer term, we need to think about restocking these sanctuaries in the future. We monitor survivorship. It's been terrific. One thing about clams, they live a long time. We haven't had any predation problems. Again, knock on wood. So a lot of these sanctuaries that we planted 12 years ago, they've been paying returns every single year. I mean, survivorship is still near 100% in a lot of these sanctuaries that we planted. But eventually the clams will die, right? And eventually, we got to think about putting more clams in.
I mean, my concern is for the sustainability of this resource for our local baymen. I mean, it's such an important part of our maritime heritage. I'd like to be ahead of that curve in making sure that we don't continue to see that negative. You want to, make sure that we always have this resource for generations.
Levels too. I mean, you basically the most fecund species, the clam, is when it's in its cherry stone phase. But once you get above the cherry stone phase, its fecund level gets lower and lower and lower and lower. So I mean, if we planted majority of this was cherries or top neck or whatever, I mean, you have an explicit time of year until they become chowders, and then their fecund level goes drastically down. So I mean, there is obviously a 10-year period here where you have optimum conditions, and then it's going to wane.
Yep.
So, and I don't know what size you actually planted out over the period of time. I mean, that's obviously data that's in some scrapbook somewhere.
Yeah, no, great point. Another reason restocking, sometime in the future, we think about restocking. I mean, as far as the size, most of them were actually little necks that we planted.
So you had 10 years.
Yes, we
15 years of decent production.
So what do we have to do to get ahead of the curve on this restocking situation?
So just another really, well, I mean, as far as restocking, I think that's a matter of funding in the future. We got a lot of the funding through the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program, and so that would be something if it, as it continues, this is private foundation money that mostly has funded this project. That would be something to look for. The Long Island Shellfish Restoration Project, which was funded by New York State, Shinnecock Bay was one of the beneficiaries from that, so we wound up getting funding to plant. That added, of the 5 million clams, about 1.5 million clams was funded through that Long Island Shellfish Restoration Project. So, I mean, just something we'll be thinking about at Stony Brook will be future funding and keeping an eye on this to be able to plant more clams when needed. But one really cool thing I kind of just want to, I think you'll be really interested in this. I mean, I think with the system that we've created put in spawner sanctuaries in western Shinnecock Bay to provide larvae and set in eastern Shinnecock Bay. I think we've really established, what I would call a sustainable hard clam fishery. Another thing that the hydrodynamic model showed, I didn't show it here, but clams that spawn in eastern Shinnecock Bay, within 3 days, all that larvae is exported out into the Atlantic Ocean. It goes right through the inlet. So those clams that are in the eastern bay really are not contributing to the population anymore. Okay, their larvae are all getting exported. With that said, the fishery can harvest those clams, take advantage of that resource without doing any harm to the population. It's really a sustainable fishery, and so as long as we can keep the recruitment going, right? Keep the larvae going with the clams that are planted in the western bay, that fishery is very sustainable, and people can keep fishing.
That's great, because then we could all focus our efforts on making sure that there's restocking of those sanctuaries, and we can get ahead of that curve.
Yeah.
Because my concern is for the baymen. It's such a part of our heritage, and we've all worked so hard. There was a lot of stakeholder, skin in the game with this, with closing off Tiana Bay and making it a sanctuary, and that this whole Pine Neck area to the west. You had a lot of people that invested in this, and I want to make sure that those investments are paying these dividends of the hard clam, the harvest, for generations to come. And what I'm hearing now is actually good news, because I think that if we all work together, we can continue with a sustainable restocking of this, and water quality hopefully will improve with other enhancements that we do in the upland, with people upgrading septic systems and dealing with better runoff practices. This is something that could be a good story for the long haul. So
I'm also wondering too, there's some sort of way that we could facilitate some sort of program that would hire some baymen to, harvest from the eastern bay and then just bring them to the western bay and dump them in plots. I think they might be able to do it efficiently.
I think that's a great idea. Funny enough, when we were planting clams from 2012 to 2021, the last clams that we planted were in 2021. But during that period, most of the clams are wild harvested from Long Island, okay, in other bays, and most of them were coming from Long Island Sound at the beginning of the program. Then the clam fishery started really taking off in the eastern bay, and we're purchasing basically the clams from local distributors, right? So primarily there was Captree Clam, and then Ocean Rich were the two distributors. And funny enough, by the end of the project, a lot of the clams that we were purchasing from the clam distributors were coming from eastern Shinnecock Bay, because the fishery was growing so much. So we were doing that. We were buying clams that were harvested in eastern Shinnecock Bay and then planting them in western
we're
Shinnecock Bay.
recycling too now.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? There was some information that I just ran across that there is another, I don't know if it's another oyster disease, but it's a pretty critical disease that is going on from Louisiana to the northeast right now, that has just been showing that I don't know if it's derma, I don't know if it's MSX, but they don't think it is. Do you have, and I know you had correspondence with a lot of these, are we putting a lot of efforts in on something that might get wiped out? Should we be pacing ourselves, because there is a big die-off going on currently? And do we know what disease that actually is?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. Exactly the disease you're referring to. There's a few things going on. Dermo is ubiquitous; it's everywhere. Okay, and at the hatchery level, there's a lot of work to try to build resistant strains, right? So you're taking basically your survivors. We're doing that. We're taking the 5-year-old oysters that have been living for 5 years, that have survived for 5 years in Shinnecock Bay. We're spawning them to make larvae, because we figured, hey, they survived this long. There's something good going on there. So, as far as some of the other oyster diseases, there's juvenile oyster disease. You mentioned MXS. We haven't seen that in Shinnecock Bay. I've seen it in other places on Long Island. One thing that you might be referring to that's really caused a lot of concern is that there's actually a virus, and it's decimating oyster populations in Europe. And I live in Australia, and it's actually oddly enough, it's a herpes virus. It's related to herpes, and so horrible headlines when you say oysters have herpes. So there's a lot of concern that this virus, but I'm I'm
Yeah,
not
it's an
aware.
East Coast. It's affecting the East Coast oyster, and it just came out, and it's like, I don't. So
Yeah.
I'd like to know before we put all our eggs in one basket, saying let's
Yeah.
do this oyster reef.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's get some resistance. Let's make sure we breed in the resistance as we find out what this disease actually is,
Yeah.
and I believe it's MSX that's mostly. The oysters are a lot more susceptible to death of MSX when they have a considerable amount of silt on them or mudding. So, like with the area of Pine Neck where you're talking, it is site specific. If you have a better shot at oysters living when you put them in an area that's a hard bottom, or
Yeah,
So.
exactly. And that was one of the reasons for selecting this area. It's a really nice bottom, and that's also the reason that we're putting a base of shell down, which is a lot of shell.
And it's historically been a very good area, and it would be interesting to see if
it takes.
The area that was chosen, I'm familiar with it because I work with the people from Pew, and I said that was a good area because back when I used to clam, scratch rake, there was rocks and a lot of cobble there. So you really didn't have that muddy bottom, which is a little further offshore. So when you put an oyster down, it's not going to bury up. So it's a good spot. But I have a question. This year we got 1 million clams from Cornell, and they were very small. We planted them. What size would you recommend? Instead of getting 1 million clams, would it be better if we have Cornell maybe grow the clams for another season and get 100,000 clams that would survive a little better? I mean,
Yes.
because I've been doing this as a trustee for 18 years, and long before that as a bayman, and we used to get the clams and put them on our racks and grow them. And it seems like there was a certain size clam that would really have a good, chance to survive. And I don't want to be putting 100,000 clams out there and having them eaten by green crabs and blue crabs.
Yeah, and that's really been the case, and that's kind of been a lesson that hasn't been learned for decades now on Long Island. And a lot of seed clams go in. We've done a lot of monitoring, not just in Shinnecock Bay, but in other bays, planting clam seed. When the seed is about 10 millimeters, we're not, or less than 10 millimeters, we're recovering none, basically. I mean, almost 100% mortality. And that's about the size, maybe 10 is about the size you get to in one season with the hatchery process. So really they need to kind of be overwintered and grown a little more. And there's some,
and that's almost impossible to do in a flupsy. Maybe now we can because of global warming, but I mean it's almost virtually impossible to overwinter.
Yeah, and some people I don't know if like Barley out in East Hampton. I mean, he'll overwinter them in cages, just to keep them going, and then start again the following year. So, but you can't do massive scale, also, right? You just don't have. It's really hard to do massive scale like that. So, but still, as far as directly answering the size, around 20 millimeters. When we plant about 20 millimeters. We've seen about 20-25% survival, so that's a pretty good size. But still, that will take more than probably more than a year. Like maybe some of your fastest growing clam seed might get that big in a year, but it probably is they're going to need to be overwintered.
So what makes more sense to do with the resources that we put into these smaller?
More spawner. I mean, spawning stock is more bang for your buck.
That's what
We had this discussion this year when we were ordering seed from Cornell, but we wanted to keep doing what we were doing because we have an area like a certain embayment that does hold seed really well. But we all as a board were questioning the amount of money we were putting towards clam seed, and would we be better off just putting this towards the spawning section?
Yeah, I mean, based on what you're saying and your statistics, it almost sounds like there could be money spent. I see John wants to get in on this. Well, you got to get up there, John. Yeah, you can't speak from there.
As far as
That's John Sellier.
As far as getting spawning stock, you don't have to buy it. You go up to the Peconic River, get 10 guys to volunteer diggers, and you get plenty of clams, the local clams, and then you can enhance your spawning areas. I mean, we did it for years when I was a trustee.
Yeah.
Hasn't been done in quite a long time, and we got permits from the DEC. We got between 10 and 15 diggers up there. Some days we got 300 bushels. I mean, Eddie and I alone did 40 bushels, in a couple hours.
I'd love to see the money go towards something like that rather than
So
That's what I'm saying. It's like if you're seeing 100% mortality,
I mean, we could go up there and survey it, but, go through, tell the DEC we're gonna go up to the Bay Council one day and look at it. But there were a lot of, healthy little necks there, right up to giant chowders and all around Colonel's Island, west of they wouldn't let us go west of the bridge because of the sewage outfall, but, all around Colonel's Island, just east of Colonel's Island, in front of, what was it, Evergreen Road?
Yeah, Evergreen Road.
Road. There were a lot of clams there. I mean, dense population.
Yeah, it makes
so
more sense.
you get a tremendous amount of clams locally to put in as spawner sanctuaries. And one other thing I just want to mention, like you said, 2021, and then you've seen it come off. When the data is collected for this year, you will see probably a record harvest for Shinnecock Bay.
Yeah, that's all I like to hear.
So it's definitely, when it's all said and done, you'll see higher.
John, I'd like to keep that going.
Let me, I'm glad you said that, because let me just go back one slide. Take a look at this. Hold on. Look at, so that's our surveys, the top plot. And in 2022, we had a massive hard clam recruitment year. You see that big spike it's on, looking at the top plot all the way to that big bar. And that orange, that's all new recruits. So we had a massive recruitment year in 2022.
That would make,
Which would make sense.
Anecdotally,
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
What are those colors in these what are those different colors?
On
Yellow.
the bottom?
I can't see it, but
The bottom?
yeah, that bottom.
So that's a heat map of clam density.
Oh.
So so basically the yellow is the highest densities, and the bluers are the low densities. So when you look at Western Shinnecock Bay, it's really less than 1 clam per meter squared, of course, most of Western Shinnecock Bay, and they're mostly big clams. They're mostly chowders and cherries. And then in Eastern Shinnecock Bay, we got densities up to like 40 clams per meter squared in some places, and it's mostly little clams.
Again, those colors match up with anecdotally what I say.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Good, we're in agreement. Cool. And I think that's an incredible. So a program like that, I mean, I think would be incredible. It also reminds me, like on a lot, the state used to do a transplant program at Raritan Bay for a long time.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, but to do a transplant program like that makes a lot of sense, and then using the funds to support, to pay
There
the
is some
payment.
nuances of putting we ran into this when we spoke before about the Mecox one, but I think we could possibly get around it. But taking closed areas and putting it into open areas, but then there's spawner sanctuary areas. There is some nuances, but I think with help from you guys as well to work with the DEC, instead of just the trustee board going and applying for a permit like this, if you have a cohesive effort with a bunch of entities and say, look, we've had this resource, let us use it. But they're protecting people's interest of health concerns.
Sure. Yeah.
So there is an issue.
Well, the stumbling block by us using the Peconic Bay was the red tide in the springtime. They didn't want us to catch the shellfish, bring it over here and put it in. But if we take it, because Western Shinnecock Bay is like the epicenter on the south shore for the red tide. So my thought would be if we take it out of the Peconic River where there is some and put it over here, it's already closed to harvest because it's a sanctuary and it's already has tainted with the red algae. But maybe working with you and a recommendation to the DEC for us to do these transplants, because I mean I would love to go up there and catch those clams, because I mean the last time we worked up there was so many clams up there, and they were literally all the way from the size of a pea to the size of a coconut.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and what I've seen is when we do plant those clams, whether it's in Mill Creek or in Sabonic or in Cold Springs, a year or two later we seem to get a substantial set from them. So they are very good spawning stock.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great idea. It'd be a mechanism to continue to restock the western sanctuaries. To keep this going. And if you do buy more clam seed, I would just try to, request just 20 millimeters and above.
Okay.
I would say that would be a cutoff. Where you'll get pretty good survivorship.
Cut down on them. Yeah, because you want to cut down on that mortality. Because
I have a quick question too. You were talking about using 30 to 40 yards of cured shell coming from New Hampshire. Do you have any rough idea how much you guys spent for that much shell?
So this shell is coming from the Nature Conservancy, and I think it's really being, it was cured and collected by the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire, and so the shell itself is free. It's just the transport cost. So it's going to be like 2 dump truck loads. So whatever that costs to transport it.
Right. Well, I did a little bit of research last year about these relic oyster reefs in the bottom of the Peconic, and in Virginia and Chesapeake, they do a lot of harvesting of it up out of the bottom using specialized dredges, and it'd be, I just keep thinking there's such an opportunity to do the same thing here in the Peconic if you could just figure out an efficient way of doing it.
Yeah, but I've also heard with that fossilized shell that really the oyster set isn't that great on it. I haven't used it myself, but this is just what I've heard from other people, that it's not really that great for setting oyster spout onto.
I mean, Bloom and such have been doing this for hundreds of years up here, but they harvest their own shell and they let it dry, and then they put it out at the correct time whereby you can catch the set.
Yep.
So I mean, it's all about timing of when you put the dried shell down.
Yep.
And then normally, if they don't have more than 10 set per shell, they dredge it up again and put it back on the beach and let it dry.
Yeah.
They don't just leave it out there to get muddied up and mucked up. So I mean, it's a practice they've been doing for the past 150, 200 years up in Connecticut religiously.
Yep. And
prior to that, that's why we put in the actual Peconic Canal, was to get Great South Bay seed to the Peconics to plant those oyster beds. So I mean, it's not. We've been playing oyster games for a long time prior to hatcheries.
Oh yeah.
And very successful. I mean, I know that I talked with a bayman up west. They use bluestone. They actually use bluestone as their culturing mechanism rather than shell, and they have just as much success rate, and it's readily available. So I mean, there's other mechanisms to catch a set. It's all about the timing, the salinity, and when you put it in the water.
Yeah, you're 100% right on. That's why with the recruitment surveys we've been doing for the couple of years to look for oyster recruitment with these things, that's exactly why we swap them out every 3 weeks. So we can find the timing of recruitment and be like, all right, this is, and it might change. It would change from year to year, but you get an idea. Because that would be, like you said, you don't want to put out your substrate too soon because it will just get fouled and nothing will settle on it. So you want to be able to, if you are putting shell in an area, like if we would have put some shell off of cowfish or something like that, we would want to make sure the timing is right, that we do it literally, within a week or two before recruitment is happening. And so that's why we're trying to figure out the timing of recruitment. And obviously you don't want to put it out too late, or you're too late. But so the timing is really important, and totally agree. Yeah.
You do realize that the Shinnecock Canal, the bulkheads that are there, if you go through the canal, it's lined with hundreds of thousands of oysters.
And they love those little. There's like little
The window boxes.
like the little window boxes with the.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what they're.
Oh, when you go into the lock and you're supposed to put your rope around that little.
That's what that is.
And it's solid, full of oysters.
Because they love that complex structure, and they just every one of those is just filled with oysters.
I know.
It was actually completed by accident. That because we hadn't found any recruitment in Shinnecock Bay for a couple of years, and then we were sitting in the locks. Actually working on a kelp project in the Peconic and just kind of sitting there waiting, and it was low tide. And then we look and we're like, is that an oyster on the wall? And we were blown away. Yeah. So it was just a completely accidental observation, and then that got us looking in that area more and more. Yep. And you'll see the highest concentration of natural set oysters are around there, and then it just dissipates as you get further and further away from the canal to the point where you find nothing.
It fans out. It's like a fan.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, James, is there anybody on Zoom that wants to?
Yeah, I don't. That's to them, but I don't.
Is there anybody on Zoom?
There's someone on Zoom, but they don't have the hand up.
Okay.
Okay.
We're not at public portion yet. We're not at public portion yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but I didn't know if there's someone
There's something about that wants to.
pew or whatever.
Oh, all right. I got you. Somebody wants to speak from any of the other organizations that are involved in the project?
No one else is up there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so we have a public hearing, right?
Yep.
Got a notice of public hearing on amendment of Blue Book A340, amending the management of parks of the clean of the waters of the town of Southampton, Article 2, Section 10, regarding hard plans. I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll second it.
Seconded, trustee Warner, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so the public hearing is open. I see Special Counsel Lombardo is going to address the board and public.
Okay, good afternoon. The purpose of this public hearing is to consider making the boat limit moratorium that was placed in the Shinnecock Bay earlier this summer a permanent fixture. That was the purpose of the hearing for today. It will put a limit of 2,000 hard clams per day per boat. And this is something which I've been told by the sponsors as something which is helpful in the management of the fishery.
Okay.
Thank you, Joseph.
This is, this hard clam limit of 2,000 was specifically designed for eastern and western Shinnecock Bay. It doesn't take in consideration the rest of the town. So it'll be just for that particular area.
Yes,
For those particular areas.
when we put the moratorium in, we put it on the website, gave the coordinates and the locations
Yep.
that it would apply to. And again, this will just make it permanent.
Okay. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak about this topic?
Anybody on Zoom? Your hand up.
Not about this.
Okay.
Just for devil's advocate, could someone use 2 boats and go out and get 2,000, come in, switch boats, and
It's
get
per,
them to
it's
them?
per license.
I heard per boat per day.
Are we gonna be able to, is the guy gonna be able to put up 2,000 quick in eastern Shinnecock and then go to western Shinnecock and put up 2,000?
No, it's both.
Both, they're separate,
No,
2,000 entities?
no, it's one for. It's 2,000 for either area.
For both areas, so somebody can
No, you
put
can.
their,
2,000 for either if you're gonna work in eastern or western. That's the
that's
limit.
it. you're
That's
done.
it.
For
Then you can go,
Shinnecock, then you could go to Peconic,
yeah, and you go to Peconic or Murchis Bay or someplace else in the town if you
so
so
you can't
desire.
go over it, you can hook up to Moriches and try and put
Yes.
out the bigs if you want?
Yep.
Alright.
Yep.
So it's possession limit, so.
Yes.
Right, so from the enforcement perspective, how is that gonna be handled, Joseph?
Gonna have to depend on the Bay Constables. That's the enforcement mechanism that we have in place.
I mean, you're saying it's like not for other areas, and you're specifically for taking from Shinnecock, so if someone was someplace else before and then shows up in Shinnecock,
Or you need to
so
have,
they're possessing more than 2,000 at that point in
You
time.
need-
The legalities of the state tagging system and shellfish
Yeah.
laws are gonna help jurisdict that.
That's what I was
yeah, because
trying
if
to
you
get
were
on
working
record.
in Murchis Bay in the morning and you had 500 clams, you'd have the clams tagged SS12. Your shellfish log would read that you work from 6 to 10 o'clock, and then you, each one of the areas you need to specifically tag with specific areas and keep a log of those areas
Right.
that you harvest.
Thank you, because that's what I wanted to get on the record.
I was gonna have to defer to.
Yeah,
to
that's what I
Trustee
wanted,
Warner on
Yeah.
that mechanism.
that's what I
So
wanted to
it's
get.
very-
Thank you for
it's okay.
clarifying that for
It's accountable. Yep.
the hearing, thank you.
I would recommend you close the hearing at this time.
All right, if we don't, anybody else,
Nobody else is gonna speak, there's nobody on Zoom, then I'd make a motion to close the public hearing.
I will second that.
Hold on. Did you wanna
Is it just,
You gotta speak from here, John.
today's hearing specific to the 2,000 clam limit solely, or I know that several months ago there had been some discussion about coming up with possibly a program for endorsements
That's not dealing with this,
of license. You're not going to do that.
not today.
Not today.
That's not part of this, we just wanna take care of
He
this.
can speak to, he's allowed to talk to
You-
his concerns
you-
of the issue. Once we close the 2,000, as far as your concerns of, permits or within the town, he's welcome, it's public portion, he's welcome to speak.
Yes.
Well, yeah, no,
Just like a couple comments.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
public portion, yeah, but this one specifically is just dealing with the limit, and then other stuff we'll take up.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just for the 2,000 limit. And then if you wanna speak on the other one, the public portion, that's gonna require another public hearing as well, so.
Okay, but he can still speak to it
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah,
It would
absolutely.
be
Just-
good because it would have more board to digest of the concerns of the baymen of what their thoughts are on other issues.
Yeah, that's a
Correct.
public portion.
Yeah.
This is just dealing with this specific 2,000 limit.
So,
So, Ed, you wanna make the motion?
Motion.
I already
We
motioned.
have a
it.
motion and a second
A
already.
second.
I
Seconded
need
by,
all in favor.
yeah,
aye.
Aye.
okay. So that's closed. Now, we can switch to
Public portion.
public portion. Now, so anybody that wants to speak, so let's start off with
Just,
John.
John Semler, just a few comments relative to what we had spoken about a few months prior. I know that Brookhaven Town, and I think Chip Marin had some discussions with managers in Brookhaven, shellfish managers, that they have an endorsement program where you may be able to have a shellfish permit for the town as a whole, but in order to work in specific areas, let's say use Shinnecock East for an example, you'd have to have an endorsement. And there was some discussion of possibly having, in order to be eligible for that, let's say, just to throw some numbers out, in the last 10 years, you would have to have had a license for 3 or 4 years in order to be eligible to continue to harvest in eastern Shinnecock with an endorsement. I mean, we're going through these great pains too, with spawning sanctuaries and all the study and the movement of the spat throughout the water, and it's all for naught if we don't have a finite amount of effort, new licenses and so forth. That's not to say that I don't think people should be able to get licenses. I think like a young person who has gone to school here, lived there a whole life, and they want to get a shellfish permit, a commercial shellfish permit. I think there should be some kind of an avenue for that, or a conduit to some kind of an apprenticeship that allows them. But in the last several years, we've seen a number of people that have moved in here with, some with questionable information in order to get a license. And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that if we don't pull it in, then we're going to be in a situation that Scott just referenced, having concern, where we're going to see a dive in our shellfish populations. And if we could stay at a sustainable level and figure out what amount of effort is feasible to keep things, promulgate the shellfish populations, then I think that's, we have to think about those things. But the endorsement, I think it would be
Helpful towards work.
helpful. We have to figure out what is where we go before we break off the
Right,
cliff.
I think what you need to do is you want to find that equilibrium where those sanctuaries are sustaining this.
Right.
And you don't want to go beyond that and see that trend continue to dive. It's harder to get that back. So now that we are where we are, we've got this plane cruising at a beautiful, smooth, no turbulence altitude here. I think we need to keep it there.
And
I
we
think
also, like,
It's great
we've
suggestion.
had people like myself and Ed and Timmy and dozens of other baymen have put in a lot of effort in. I mean, we grew sea clams and racks in Weesup Creek. We've done transplants. We've been very community minded, and we're the ones that want things. Our livelihoods just depend on it being sustainable. So we've put a lot of effort in over time, and when you have some people that just are opportunists and they just arrive when after you did all this work and everything is wonderful, and somebody just jumps in, I think we have to safeguard against that. And
I agree.
I just want to quick speak to, so there's some clarity because there was even some confusion before we were in executive session. Currently, there's a moratorium on any shellfish permits for 6 months in the town of Southampton. Commercial shellfish permits. There's a possibility we may have to roll that in farther as we discuss other ideas to like you say, maintain the shellfish population as a sustainable resource. The endorsement is definitely a topic of discussion. I believe it has a lot of very good credence because it is protecting a resource that there was so much effort, as you said, put in to make that resource finally come alive again. You know, like we saw the statistical data. Eastern Shinnecock had no production for quite a long time. The beauty of the endorsement is, I believe, it's not going to necessarily inhibit people to continue to try and be baymen. So you're gonna have a young fella that comes along and says, I want to be a bayman, okay? But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to jump right on the gravy train as a bayman. You're going to have to go to other embayments, of which we have plenty in the town of Southampton. You're going to have to go and work for 3 to 4 years, whatever number we come up with, and work on the bay and scratch out a living in these other embayments, whereby then you can get an endorsement to work Shinnecock Bay. But it can't just be a gravy train whereby you jump in, like you say, somebody from up west sees the resource, jumps in for the hot shot, and then is out of there. You're going to have to put your time in. So go ahead.
I know that there is a precedent-setting case about denying people's access to shellfish permits, and it's the Hassan versus the town of East Hampton case. It was in the early 80s, I believe, and the judge said basically you cannot deny somebody a shellfish permit when they move in because it's an infringement or an impairment on interstate commerce. But the endorsement addresses that because you're not denying somebody a license, you're just dictating or managing how they can use it. So to me, it works.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, I mean, John, like I said, we had a lot of public hearings ahead of the formation of these sanctuaries where everybody gave up some space. Everybody has invested in this. We've all got skin in the game. Nobody wants to see this fail.
When I prosecuted the Brookhaven Bayman case on behalf of this board, I became very familiar with the Hassan case. So
Yeah.
we definitely will keep it in mind.
Yeah. So you know what? Be on keep a look on the radar for future public hearings on this, because obviously you're speaking in public portion. But just like we dealt specifically with the 2,000 limit at that public hearing, we'll have more specific public hearing on this situation. But great commentary, thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in public portion? It could be on any topic, obviously public portion. It could be on the same topic. You can state your name for the record and take a
My
few
name
minutes.
is Dick Froelich. I just want to reiterate what John said, and then I just have two general comments. The first is the clam always spawns best when it comes from someplace else. If you take the same clam out of the same bay, it doesn't spawn. That's my family's opinion and my opinion, and my father, my grandfather. When you take a clam, say you take it from somewhere else and you put him in a new body of water, he thinks it's a totally different place. He thinks he's an invasive species, and he spawns and he spawns. When you take a clam from here, it doesn't matter how old he is or what type of shape he's in, he doesn't spawn as well. So it does best to take a clam from Peconic or somewhere else and then move it to a different area. And then he thinks he's in a different environment, and he spawns to try to reproduce, to repopulate that area. The other comment I want to make is about making an oyster reef. I'm not old enough to remember where the oysters were in the bay. Eddie's, I'm sure he does. So you can put things that you think are going to survive in a certain area. Mother Nature made them there at one point for a reason, because the environment was right there. So if you think you can put them here and they weren't there 100 years ago, they're not going to be there even if you put them today. They might survive for 2 or 3 or 5 years, but they're not going to live there. Probably the reason why the spawn from the oysters is going, because it goes where it always once was. That's a reef that they man-made, and the natural reef used to be over here. So maybe you need to look where the natural reef was and make the reef there, and maybe you could repopulate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else on Zoom perhaps wants to jump in on public portion, it could be any topic.
No one's in.
No one on Zoom, nobody here, so I'll motion to close public portion at this point then.
Second.
Seconded, trustees Barron and Warner, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so let's get to the application. Take care now, thank you. For permits, I have trustee resolution 2024-264, first renewal of Shinnecock Shores Association. 11 Shinnecock Road East Quad, tax map 900-363-2-42. I recommend its approval.
Second.
Seconded, trustee Warner, all in favor?
Aye.
Trustee resolution 2024-265, renewal of the application for Kim Lester, the first one, 17 Allison Lane, Hampton Bays, Suffolk County Tax Map 900-323-5-9, body of water Foster's Creek. I recommend its approval. I need a second.
Second.
Seconded, trustee Barron, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's you, Chip.
Oh, sorry. So, trustees, 2024-266. This is application by Bruce Schultman and Melissa Schultman of 2 Seagull Hill Road in the village of North Haven, New York, in the body of Poles Creek. This was an application for a 4-foot by 77-foot fixed dock.
I'll second on that.
Seconded, trustee Warner, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do you want to
Okay.
come?
I'm sorry to interrupt, I just wanna make one more general comment. He said before that they get the oysters from the oyster farmers. Most oyster farmers, I believe that the oysters are sterile. And the reason for that, the oyster farmer spawns, he doesn't want his own oysters spawning on his oysters before they grow to maturity. So when you're buying an oyster from an oyster farm, that oyster, a certain percentage of it is sterile. Just a general comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I got trustee resolution 2024-267, application of trumpets at 58 South Bay Avenue in Eastport. This was the renewal. They had for an expired permit that they started work on after the expiration. Could I get a second for this?
I'll second on that.
Myself and trustee Warner, all in favor?
Aye.
Bless
Okay.
you.
Bless you. Trustee resolution 2024-268 authorizes the contribution to the Sag Harbor Water Quality Initiative for 2024. We've given money in the past. Mary and Eddie came here before us last meeting asking for a contribution this year, and I believe we're going to pledge $2,000 towards that program, which we have in the past. So I recommend its approval. I need a second.
Seconded, trustee Parsons, all in favor?
Aye.
Trustee resolution 2024-269, notice of adoption of the Blue Book A340, amending the management and products of the water of town of Southampton, Article 2, shellfish. We had a public hearing today. We closed it. I'd like to put forward this resolution.
Seconded,
Second
all
on
in
it.
favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Trustee resolution 2024-270, notice of public hearing on trustees' proposed 2025 budget. Special meeting, I believe it's Tuesday, October 15th at 1 o'clock. I recommend it, that we approve it.
I'll second
Any
that.
second on
Trustee
it?
McLaughlin, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we got 2024-271, recall and amend resolution 2024 TRUS-175 to authorize the continuation of retaining the professional services of Joseph Lombardo for legal consultation. 2024-175 was adopted on June 16th, authorizing payment for professional services. Whereas that resolution shall be recalled and amended to amend the amount not to exceed $25,000 to an amount not to exceed $35,000. Recommend its approval. I'll make the
Second.
motion. Seconded, trustee Warner, all in favor?
Aye. Trustee resolution 2024-272, authorize expenditure for Bobcat repair for the 2017 T650. We discussed this, needs to be fixed,
I'll
so I
second- I'll
recommend.
second.
Seconded, trustee McLaughlin, all in favor?
Aye.
We have trustee resolution 2024-273. This This is for the Shinnecock Indian Nation beach driving permits for 2025, whereas there's been a long history of cooperation between the trustees and the freeholders and commonality of the town of Southampton and the Shinnecock Indian Nation, whereas there have been recent discussions between the Shinnecock Indian Nation and the village of Southampton regarding the use of certain roads to provide access to ocean beaches, whereas the town trustees wish to support the Shinnecock Nation maintaining their heritage of accessing the ocean beach. From the town trustee and village roads, now therefore be it resolved that the town trustees shall donate 36 4x4 beach driving permits to the tribal council of the Shinnecock Indian Nation to be distributed at no cost to tribal members of their selection. And be it further resolved that the tribal council shall provide the town trustees with the necessary personal information of the selected tribal members and their vehicle to authorize the issuance of the permit, and once issued, the town trustees shall provide the permits to the tribal council for distribution. Seconded, trustee McLaughlin, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Trustee Resolution 2025-274, warrant number 16 of 2024 for $15,509.90. The check register reads says Automotive Retail Inc., $566.34. Bobcat L.I. Medford, $1,811.96. Fossil and Sweeney Inc., $260. Constructs LLC, $203.65. Elm Financial Services, $3,567.96. Fisher Signs Shirts LLC, $700. Inner Signs, $45. Lopez Equipment Corporation, $109.71. Nugent and Potter, $96.98. James Olivo, $26.87.50. PSEGLI would be $105.55. Riverhead Building Supply, $108.04. Sawcloth and Stearns LLP, $5,232.63. In the town of Southampton, $14.58 for a total of $15,509.90. I recommend its approval. I need a second.
Seconded, trustee McLaughlin, all in favor? Aye. That concludes the agenda. I just want to reiterate again for the folks that may have missed the work session that there's a massive dredge project that's going on between the Shinnecock Bay and the Quad Canal. There's the dredges and pumps and a lot of piping and equipment in the area. It's currently in the Quad Canal area with all kinds of hose and pipes. And just please, if you're in that area, exercise caution, navigate slowly, give them a break, and just please, pay attention because this is a big project. It's going to be going on for a couple of months. They're going to be pumping sand in several areas. They're going to be pumping sand to the Diana Bayside area to help cover the riprap there where the horseshoe crabs keep getting stuck. They're going to be pumping sand out onto the ocean beach west of Shinnecock. And then they're going to also be pumping sand to a trustee area that's to the south of where Shagwong Marina is in Hampton Bays. I did take my boat up into the Quad Canal yesterday to check on this, and there's quite a bit of equipment there. I just think from just a safety perspective and a public notice to mariners, please pay attention when you're going in that area and exercise caution. Okay, so I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Not on that.
Good.
But one other thing, the Shinnecock locks are fixed, so people can navigate safely through there, and our pump out boat program will be up and running, and so that we can take some of the effluent out of the boats, so that people can put them away for the winter. Cornell has done their shellfish reseeding that the trustees do every year. They put the oysters in Diana Bay to add to the shellfish sanctuary that Cornell and the college have established there. And we also put spat on shell in Quannock Bay to see how they will live there and maybe add to that in a future time if everything grows well. The scallops and clams, they were put in Shinnecock Bay and also in Cold Springs. There will be maps in our office printed out of the shellfish locations, the seating locations for the public, in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so I think what we can do, we don't have any more exec. We're done with that for today. So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by trustee Warner. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Not too bad.
Now we have to